welcome to Legally Speaking with me, Tarun Nangia. This is part 2 of our series on Posco, and we will go and highlight an issue that Justice Tara Ganju of the Delhi High Court raised. She spoke very passionately and about Posco, and she spoke that people, or in a sense, women who've gone through troublesome time should be called survivors, not victims, because that itself has a very negative connotation, saying that the girl or the woman is a victim. What we will also focus on are the other parts of what she's been vocal about Posco. She's spoken about this last week also at a gathering and other places. She also said that her courts are doing a lot on the issue of Posco via judgments. So that also we will speak about. I have two panelists with me today who can speak much better on this subject than I can articulate. I have with me senior advocate Priya Hingorani. I have with me Niharika Karanjawala from Karanjawala and Company. Good to see you both, and looking forward to some interesting insights on this issue. I'll start with senior advocate Priya Hingorani. Ma'am, you saw Justice Tara Ganju articulate on this issue. Your initial few comments before we move into the discussion.
Thank you, Tarun, for having me again. And it's a very important, a very sensitive topic which we are going to talk about today. Ever since the Act has come into place, we find that a lot of legal awareness and sensitivity around this subject needs to be created. And it is heartening to know that honorable judges of the High Court and honorable judges of the Supreme Court are making comments on this, or are feeling sensitive about it, to take it up in different forums, or even while passing these judgments in courts. There are certain issues on this which I feel are still really need to be addressed at a very, very fast stage, because the biggest issue which I find is that compensation, which is supposed to be paid to the young girls at the initial stage, is still not happening. Only about 15% of the cases which come, if you do a survey of about 100 cases, only 15% of these girls have got compensation at the initial stages for whatever the requirement is for their medical or for their education. So this is a concern which has, of course, been mentioned about by Honorable Justice Tara Ganju as well in a recently held seminar. And I'll take up all these other issues on later on once we discuss this further.
See, one thing that you highlighted in your initial comment was the compensation bit. It is very, very important to look at this aspect. We'll also take it up in future because we ourselves were not aware, at least I was not aware, that it's just 15% is what you said. I'll take this to Niharika Karanjawala from Karanjawala and Company. Niharika, in a large law firm like yours, you take up all kinds of cases. These kinds of cases also come to you. I want to understand from you two things. Is the system tough on these survivors? And Justice Tara Ganju also said in the speech the other day that there is a trauma that lasts beyond the immediate time of the incident. It can be years into somebody's life that they have difficulty living also, because this trauma comes back. And always try and help people even in your neighborhood. That is what she said, that, if you find somebody is going through a difficult time, you should be supporting them. Does it show a human side of the judiciary that, they are going into even these nuances to ensure that women get support, these girls get support?
Absolutely, Tarun. I couldn't agree more. It certainly shows the humane and nuanced side of the judiciary, because these are the issues that really go to the heart of what the people need and require, right? And as Priya ma'am said, compensation is a huge problem. It's a very small percentage of victims that actually receive the compensation. And let's keep in mind, these are the victims that have actually made this trauma public, have made these instances public and have filed FIRs. That only makes up an actually small percentage of survivors who actually face that trauma, right? So we're talking about a small percentage of a small percentage when we talk about people to whom compensation is actually paid out. Secondly, as you mentioned, and as Justice Taraganju rightly pointed out, this involves the question of trauma that takes years, perhaps a lifetime. And a very significant aspect is what therapy and psychological and treatment options does the state make available at the ground level to survivors of assault, especially to children, to adults as well, of course. But since we are discussing this in the realm of Posco, especially to children, here I'd like to say something in defense of the system, Tarun. As you'd said, is the system hard on survivors? The reality is very hard on survivors. What I will say is the Posco courts, as they are set up, they do show, and this I've seen in my own practice, a tremendous amount of sensitivity towards survivors when they come to the courts to give their witness testimony. The courts are protective. They ensure that no questioning can be done that could be detrimental to the mentality of that child, to the outlook of that child. And these are very important things that sometimes go overlooked. So here I wanted to speak in defense of the system for a moment. There is sensitivity. However, what I feel this system lacks is resources. As you and I had discussed, there is the issue of, there's a phenomenon known as rape trauma syndrome. And this affects, of course, both childhood survivors of assault as well as adults. And what's interesting to note is, it doesn't set in. It's a very insidious situation because it doesn't even begin to set in until between a couple of weeks to a couple of months after the incident, right? And what we find is, and this has been shown in a plethora of studies, trauma of this type can make epigenetic changes in you, which means it changes you at practically a molecular level. It changes essentially who you are, which is why it's so essential to provide resources to these survivors. And I'll get, when we speak about this later, I'll get to what I think the ways are in which these resources can be brought forward. But by the time this trauma actually begins to set in, begins to show its first symptoms, most survivors are already out of touch with medical sources, with legal sources, and they are at a time when, unfortunately, due to the stigma surrounding circumstances of this kind, their families are already trying to tell them to move on with their lives, to get it together and to keep moving. You know, there is the notion of a person who is a survivor, and it's a notion that statements like Justice Ganju's go a long way to turning around. There is a notion that one is damaged goods. There is a notion that, especially for young women, they won't be able to marry. They won't be able to actually move on with their lives. And so the families, even if it comes from a good place, have a habit of telling survivors to simply white knuckle it and get through it. And which is why I think it's also so important, and I'll discuss this in a moment, for the use of words like survivors as opposed to victims, because it also broadcasts to society this is not just what they are, and it attempts to remove the stigmatization involved in what these people have experienced.
Point very well taken. Now, Niharika, I'll take this to the statements that Justice Ganju made, and I'll need both of you to come in and give your inputs as well. Justice Tara Ganju said, whether it's the restorative care in the medical and healthcare system, whether it is understanding of education, familial and paralegal needs of children, we can't repair or reverse the trauma caused, but we do need to aid the child throughout her life, or at least until they achieve a certain age. There should be a way of looking at how they are dealing with this. There is a lot of awareness, dissemination of information, formulation of a child protection policy to look at prevention, not just cure. The support person to submit monthly reports, special financial relief in certain contingencies, and various other changes such as preliminary assessment form which needs to be filled up. That, coupled with the new medico-legal form, will help to progress rights of any such child. I'll take this to Senior Advocate Priya Hingorani. You heard what she said. I want to understand from you. Okay, I think we can achieve this in the state of Delhi. But in a $2,800 per capita economy, where even if you see the state of courtrooms across India, you'll shudder to think how our judges work. They work there and dispense justice. I think in many of such places, people who work in Delhi can't even sit. and our judges were, dispense justice there at those places. Many times there is no light, there's no electricity, there are so many problems. Do you think Delhi can still be an example, but this to do in India will be very difficult? Or you think there are difficulties in Delhi also in achieving this?
What Justice Tara Ganju's talked about is an ideal situation, which should be. But practically, it is not going to happen for a very long time. As you rightly said, if you go to the tier 2 cities, if you go to the smaller districts, the concept or the sensitivity which is required to deal with these cases is not there at the moment. They do have judicial trainings at the academies, but the overload, the workload in courts is so much. And the fact that they don't have resources, they don't have counselors, qualified counselors to actually counsel the young children, and the continuing, training of these counselors is it's not totally not there, not even in Delhi. I mean, if you look at the counselors who deal with them on a daily basis, they don't even get time to go and continue. There is no forum. Of course, our state legal services authorities are trying their best to put things in place and appoint counselors, have more people, more staff in these courts. But still, it's not enough. And the other issue which we find, particularly I have found when I work with these different women organizations across the country, is that the parents after a little while give up. See, the father goes for work. The brothers are either working or in schools. The small minor child, mother has to attend to the house. Who's going to take this small minor child for counseling or to the hospital or to the court? So they slowly find that these girls, particularly the minor girls, are not coming to the centers or to the counselors or even to the courts at times.
One quick question, and then I go to Niharika. Do you think Justice Tara Ganju is making an effort to push this? See, when judges make statements, it shows the intent of the judiciary. The message also goes down to the lower or the district judiciary. The message, as Justice Chandrachud says, we shouldn't say lower or subordinate, we should say district judiciary. So I correct myself. So the message goes down to the district judiciary. Do you think that is happening? That judges realize that there is a certain shortage of resources, but let's push, let's do what we can.
Yes, of course. I think, if you keep on saying again and again and again, it does get reinforced, number one. Number two, it does send a message across to the country, to the civil society that yes, judges are sensitive, judges are working on it. There's to a limit that they can do. They can speak about it, they can be on committees to make sure that this happens and take it forward, have meetings with the legal authorities and all. Of course, their intent is absolutely 100% there. But how much of it actually filters down to different states, to the ground reality is something. I think it's a group coordination, group work which needs to be done. There's no doubt in my mind.
But you gave a good idea of a coordination group. That's a good idea.
There's no doubt in my mind that efforts are being made and sincere efforts are being made. But there is a resource crunch. There is training, sensitive training required to be done continuously at all levels, which is something which they need to work on. Please understand, each court is so overburdened. In every state, the courts are overburdened with cases, one again, and every case takes time. I mean, it's not something that a case gets over in 5 minutes. A case takes time to get statements recorded. There are adjournments, there are other issues which come up. So, yes, we need to keep pushing, as you rightly said, and as Justice Tara Ganju has also said, in fact, in that very seminar, Justice Jasmeet Singh also voiced his concern and said the same issue, talked about the same issues, and talked about how they could take it further. He had some very good ideas which he mentioned. So they're reinforcing on these issues and talking about them is a good healthy sign for all of us.
Yes, point well taken. Yes, Jasmeet Singh also spoke. We did a show on that also. Nice of you to mention. I'll go to Niharika Karanjawala from Karanjawala and Company. Hey, your comments on what Justice Tara Ganju said. Second, you can also comment on this, that in a $2,800 per capita economy, how difficult it is. Third, given that you're from the millennial generation, which is neither too old, neither too young, somewhere sandwiched in between, could you reflect on this? Women looked as thinking social beings. Does it differ in India from place to place? Because in some parts of India, societies are so patriarchal that women are not treated as such. Some parts are progressive, but not every part is progressive in this country. Some parts are, in a sense, too patriarchal to allow women any autonomy. And it is said that many times in such very places, violations under Posco will be brushed up under the carpet. Families may not even allow this to be reported. And imagine the trauma of the child, that she's asked to shut up when she complains. Can she ever speak up after that? Because,
Absolutely.
when somebody is 13 or 14 and she's asked to shut up and say that, no, there's nothing like this, then the child is finished forever, because the only place for venting out is the parents, and she can't vent out there. Can you reflect on
Absolutely. Yeah, Tarun. And I'm so glad you bring that up. I'm so glad you brought up the question of societal outlook, because first of all, yeah, certainly the issue starts with the mindset. The issue starts at home, right? When you have, like I mentioned earlier, if a survivor of assault is thought of as damaged goods in their own home and by the persons closest to them, then they will invariably be denied a certain level of that humanity, because it reduces you essentially. And I think what Justice Ganju's statements here and the statements of other judges on this issue try to do is open that up and restore that humanity to these survivors, right? I also wanted to mention, since we are talking about the stigmatization of it, and since we are talking about Posco, I don't want to restrict the pool of survivors to only young women. A lot of young men are also assaulted in a similar way. And there is a stigmatization there as well, different slightly from what young women face, but equally valid, because it's considered deeply shameful for a young man to come forward and admit that they have been a survivor of assault. So, I mean, they too are discouraged largely from ever moving authorities, from ever going forward and finding help for themselves. And survivors of all types, like I said earlier, told to, or encouraged at least, to just white knuckle it and just somehow get through the rest of their lives. And that is something that requires a change in mindset, first and foremost. And yeah, now coming to the question of the actual burden of putting these things in place, I totally agree with you. The situation in cities and the situation at the grassroots level is a very, very different thing. But what is manifestly important is keeping in mind that, as Justice Ganju said, this is our future. This is the future of our citizenry. And are we willing to relinquish our citizenry to a situation of trauma that they have lived through, right? Because that is something that affects your mindset for the entirety of your life. It affects your outlook towards other people for the entirety of your whole life. It is something, and this is something we've discussed before on your show, Tarun, that assault of this kind and the impact it has on a survivor impacts not only that one individual, but it impacts the people closest to that individual for the rest of their lives, their wives, their children, their spouses, I should say. Why am I saying their wives, their spouses, their children? It impacts for absolutely the rest of your life, So while I completely agree that there are tremendous limitations on the state in terms of professionals who are qualified to deal with therapy at this level, things like that. This is something that the state must throw resources at. The state must invest in ensuring that at this grassroots level, easily accessible help is available to survivors and is available, I would say, through the entirety of their lives. It should not be restricted merely to, have you filed an FIR? You're under no obligation in the law to file an FIR. It is your choice, right, as a survivor, whether to file it or not, and giving and allowing people access to therapy cannot be misused in the sense that it isn't a compensation type thing. There is no motivation for someone who has not faced trauma of this kind to seek out therapy. One might say that if it's a question of compensation, people might misuse this provision, and I agree, people might misuse the provision, but not if it's to things like therapy
Right.
and resources like that, right? Allow it to people for the entirety of their lives. Let it be a walk-in situation where people can go. And for cases that actually happen, coming back to one thing Priya ma'am said, ensure that compensation is actually paid out across the board. Like I said, there's a small number of people that actually come and whose cases are actually brought before the courts. In the case of Posco cases, especially, and child abuse especially, there's an added stigma by the fact that statistics show us that the majority of offenders are related to the child, known to the child.
That is
So the
something which is most worrying.
Absolutely. So the family has an additional motivation in trying to keep it hidden, because not only are you contending with the stigma of having a survivor of assault in your family, you're contending with the stigma of having an assaulter in your family as well, right? So in those circumstances, families are even less likely to come forward. What I would say is, if compensation is paid out across the board, that is a small motivation for the parents. Because in Posco cases, it's parents calling the shots, let's be honest. That is a small motivation for people to come forward, maybe override that inherent
Point.
stigma and that inherent fear. And also, what I would say is, especially in Posco cases, make some modicum of therapy mandatory for the parents of that child, tied to the compensation. You can't force a survivor into therapy because you might be worsening their trauma without knowing it. You can't force a survivor into therapy. But what I would say is, tie the question of compensation in with therapy to the parents. Tell them, come in, fill out these forms for your family's compensation, sit down and listen to us for 2 hours first, so that at least you can impart from experts some knowledge of how to go about helping that child, and an encouragement to allow that child to gain help. And this is a mammoth system. When you're looking to change a well-established system, it might not be established for the entirety of our lifetimes, right? But taking a step in that direction has immeasurable value.
One quick comment, and then go to Senior Advocate Priya Hingorani for the final comment. We're almost out of time. Neharika, when Justice Ganju made this statement, do you think she's also trying to push boundaries where she's saying we'll help with whatever we'll have? And Delhi will set an example, and the Delhi High Court will set an example. It's like we will do whatever we can do best.
Absolutely. And this is one of the, I would say, this is one of the most important things the judiciary represents. They represent a practical approach to solving our problems. I'm sure when Justice Ganju made that statement, she realized the limitations upon the state as well in implementing such things, but took into account that establishment of it is the first step towards actually moving towards any modicum of justice. And I think that is where the statement was coming from. It is a highlight not only to the state to say throw resources at these survivors, but also a broadcast to society in general to say, do not see them only as victims. Look past the stigma of this. The importance cannot be overstated.
Point well taken. I'll go to Senior Advocate Priya Hingorani. Now, you in the initial days of your practice have seen the court infrastructure in district courts of Delhi, from basic issues like women's toilets. And for those generation of women to have made it as advocates itself is an achievement. Because I think society didn't even understand why women need clean and safe toilets. I mean, imagine what a foreign visitor from a developed country to India must take back home when he would have seen that safe toilets for women, clean and hygienic, are not even considered an issue in India. But I think we have come out of those days. I cite that example to show the thinking of society. I mean, those issues were not considered issues. But now we have come to a state where judges are pushing for greater and greater, in a sense, a sensitized approach to issues considering women. Your final comment on what Justice Tara Ganju said, and what is the Delhi judiciary doing, through this kind of a statement and these kind of observations? Because we see in our experience, when judges speak out, changes do happen. The message goes to the whole system.
You're right, Tarun. These messages are very important to come from the honorable judges. Of course, Justice Chandrachud has time and again voiced his opinion on various issues. His sensitization towards the issue of women and the way recently also he made a comment in court where a lawyer was trying to overreach a lady lawyer for mention before her, and I kind of rebuked the lawyer and said that you should wait for your chance, and this is no way of putting your arm around to get the mic. So it's a very small comment, very small issue on which but he talked of the decorum of the court and how you should conduct yourself with lady colleagues around you. It needs to filter down to the lowest taluka, the lowest court, magistrate court, SDM court, because conditions across the country are not as what they are in Delhi or the metropolitan cities. I recently had an opportunity to visit a small SDM court in UP for my friend's personal work. And there was not a toilet there. There was no, they didn't think it necessary to have a toilet for ladies there. There was no chair for, there were 2 chairs and they were being occupied by the males, males there. They did not even think it fit to get up and give a chair to the ladies standing in the room waiting for their turn. Sensitization to the lowest point is not there at the moment. We need to work a lot. A huge amount of work is required.
In fact, yeah, you complete.
Yeah. Number 2, when we talk of the legal system, see, efforts are being made. But again, I say there is so much, crowding. There is so much litigation. We are a very litigious country. We don't hesitate in going to court for matters, but our infrastructure is still lacking. And when you talk of these sensitive cases, whether they're rape cases on Posco, believe me, Delhi is a completely different ballgame. Even if you make Delhi an example, I would say let's work from down to top. We need to make example in smaller cities, smaller places, to say one small city, small district court can do it, why can't the others do it? And the biggest issue is rehabilitation. Compensation, yes, is there, but the legal authorities are working on that. Rehabilitation is a big issue. Justice Tara Ganju talked about one support person for a child or for a lady who's a survivor. Do we have that kind of trained staff or support staff? We don't. When are we going to start the training of this support staff? For that, we need the resources. It's very good to say one support staff for a survivor till hand-holding till the end, till that person is well-established, rehabilitated, married, gets a job, hand-holding is required. How do we do the hand-holding without the support staff, without trained support staff?
Appreciate you joining us. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Tarun. Thank you.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.